Just to review, we're going to compare photosynthesis and respiration now. So, looking at what we just talked about, we have the photosynthesis that takes energy from the sun along with water and carbon dioxide. And for eukaryotic cells at the chloroplast is attracted by chlorophyll, and we make glucose and oxygen. Photosynthesis is carried out by autotrophs or producers, things like plants, algae, and prokaryotes. In eukaryotic cells, it happens in the chloroplast. Opposite of that is respiration. In eukaryotic cells, respiration happens in the mitochondria, and it starts out with glucose and oxygen. And in the process of respiration, ATP, CO2, and water are made. All living things, autotrophs and heterotrophs, producers and consumers, go through respiration. Remember that if we look at these two equations, they're kind of opposites. The products of one will be the reactants of the other. And so they cycle these, like in the carbon cycle, back and forth. Now, what about prokaryotic cells? So real quickly, whether we're talking about chloroplasts or in photosynthesis or the mitochondria and respiration, remember prokaryotic cells do not have organelles. So they go through both processes, photosynthesis and respiration, in their cytoplasm because they don't have these specialized structures for that. Remember, pro rhymes with no, so they have no nucleus and no membrane-bound organelles. And so those would be like the eukaryotes, the mitochondria, and the chloroplast. If we look at photosynthesis and respiration in more detail, we've said that they are cycling things in nature, and the products of one are the reactants of the other. So if we notice here, the products of one are the reactants of the other, with the exception of the input energy molecules, the sun, whereas our final energy molecule here is ATP. This diagram down here does a really good job of showing you the details. So we start with the light-dependent reactions, and we go into the light-independent reactions, or the Calvin cycle, and what's given off and what's made, and how that's cycled throughout then aerobic respiration, where we go from glycolysis to the Krebs cycle, finally to the electron transport chain. In comparing the two processes, besides just the reaction, as far as where they happen for eukaryotes, remember they happen in the chloroplast for photosynthesis and in the mitochondria for respiration. This can happen anytime. However, photosynthesis, at least the light reactions, need the presence of light. The input or the reactants for photosynthesis are carbon dioxide and water. The input and the reactants for respiration are glucose and oxygen. Notice it's the exact opposite. The output, or what's produced in photosynthesis, is glucose and oxygen, and the output and what is produced in respiration is carbon dioxide and water. We get energy from the sun for photosynthesis, whereas we get energy from food in respiration. And then at the end, we have stored energy in glucose molecules, and here we have energy in ATP. Finally, if we look at what are our input and output molecules here, and you had something very similar to this in one of your activities, notice that water, sunlight, and CO2 go into photosynthesis. Glucose and oxygen are produced, and those two things go into respiration, whereas ATP and heat are made, as well as CO2 and water also will be given off through respiration. For your test, you need to be able to recognize both equations and explain where the different reactants and products come from and how they're cycled through these two processes in nature.